So we have with us today for our Foresight talk, Elijah Blackwell. Before we get into that, I'm going to do some housekeeping here at the Institute. Everybody, I think, knows how to use Zoom, and it seems like everyone has already figured out how to use the chat. But just in case, make sure that you select everyone when you're using that chat so that everyone can see. And we're going to use the Q&A for questions as well. So feel free to put your questions into the Q&A box, or if you want directly into the chat, Aicha and I will be monitoring both. The agenda for today is like every other Foresight talk. We will do a quick round of housekeeping, which I'm in, and then we will have around 25 to 30 minutes speaking with Elijah about her project and her work, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Just in case you don't know, the Institute for the Future, we are a public interest organization, a nonprofit based in the Silicon Valley. We've been around since 1968, just celebrated our 55th birthday, so happy birthday to us. And our mission is really to help organizations and leaders become more future ready. We do that through a number of different ways, one of which is to teach and practice tools and methodologies for foresight, to help organizations run research and speculate and think about the future, explore possible actions that they can take today, and through things like this, where we bring our community together and make sure that we have really exposure to all the great ideas that are out there. In terms of our training portfolio, we have a number of different offers on hand. We can obviously talk to folks more about them in the future if they want. Feel free to reach out to us. But generally, we have individual trainings, which include our core Foresight Essentials training, as well as design futures and scenario building. We do custom trainings for teams. And there are sort of self-paced, self-learning options on Coursera as well, if you want to sort of get started and take a look there. Some of our upcoming training courses that we have a great one in Palo Alto in April that is unfortunately sold out. I don't want to take credit, but I am one of the facilitators there. We'll have an online session in May, and then we've added a June session in Palo Alto in person as well. So that just opened up, and if you're interested, definitely reach out. There's also one in Berlin. We have scenario building sessions coming up, as well as design future sessions. And then a new offering that we have, Fast Futures, creating artifacts from the future with Jake Dunnigan and Alana Lipset is going to be happening on April 7th. And that's just a short 90-minute session. Highly suggest looking into that as well. Foresight community resources that we have at your disposal. We have these Foresight talks. We have what we have called Future Buddy Matches, where we can match you with a fellow futures thinker. So reach out to us if you're interested in that. You can always subscribe to our newsletter, which comes out and is really got a lot of great content and resources for you. We have practitioner meetups that we host, as well as our Medium posts, where we're covering some issues and new topics, and then finally the Urgent Optimists community platform, and that's our really great sort of platform that we're hosting on Mighty Networks. It does have a subscription fee for $99, but the activity in there is amazing, led by Jane McGonigal. A lot of experiential and speculative futures that's going on in there. Highly suggest you check that out as well. And finally, if you are with an organization and are interested in getting more involved with us, we do have our Vantage partnership program, a lot on offer there. And you can, again, feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about this or want to learn more about how to partner with us as an organization. All right, finally, with that out of the way, I want to get us started and introduce Elijah Blackwell, founder of the Oneiric Lab, a strategic foresight and immersive design consultancy. Through their background in environmental planning, digital media, and data science, Elijah engages the public imagination to co-create pathways to more resilient and just futures. Currently, as a next generation foresight practitioner fellow at the School of International Futures and a changing climate resident at the Santa Fe Art Institute, Elijah facilitates inclusive speculative design workshops to prototype future artifacts of climate transition and migration. They also serve as a climate justice fellow at Second Nature, where they develop resources to support the implementation and evaluation of climate action planning initiatives through an equity lens for over 400 colleges and universities in the US. Their ongoing projects explore transition design, data sovereignty, and solar punk fiction. All amazing things. We are so happy and honored to have you here with us, Elijah. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm going to take the slides off now so that we can get Elijah on here full screen with us. Elijah, I hear you're somewhere cool.
It's true. It's all true. Thank you so much. It's so beautiful to be in community with everyone here today. I am currently on the ancestral homeland as a visitor of the Tainos in Puerto Rico in San Juan, and I'm just so grateful to be communicating and to be in community with everybody here today.
Thank you. I know we have you here because first off, I think you're going to release a toolkit fairly soon, right? Can you maybe tell us about what's coming up and what we can expect in that?
Absolutely. So Seeding Power for Regenerative Futures is a clean economy participatory transition design toolkit that uses strategic foresight to offer 4 key resources to frontline communities, business leaders, and policy officials in the US, really focused on strategies and practices to engage in cross-sector community building. And so the first key element of the toolkit is the 4 scenarios from the year 2050 that explore climate transition efforts to identify city, state, regional, national, and tribal implications of climate migrations on civic engagement and belonging. The second key element is providing strategies for frontline communities, policy officials, and business leaders to implement to navigate some of the barriers and opportunities for long-term planning within thinking about climate resilience and regenerative design as a whole. With this strategy, I also offer some guiding questions that support all of these different stakeholders in reflecting on how to anticipate how systemic change will shape their different strategies and how best to navigate through times of deep transformation, times of crisis, and times of paradigm shifting change. And so with this, I've also offered some case studies and best practices that have emerged so that folks and communities can really be rooted in the legacies of the work that's already being done in this space that has already been transformative in many ways and has led to a lot of the historic investments that we're seeing today in climate resilience and in collective care and healing justice. And so these are really the offerings within this toolkit is how can we project into the year 2050 and offer strategies for frontline communities, policy officials, and business leaders in working towards a shared vision for desirable futures and really engaging the public imagination in a way that centers Black and Indigenous people of color and accounts for some of the legacy harms across generations.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about sort of how unaddressed intergenerational trauma is. And I think that any solutions as we think about going into the future has to deal with that probably. I'm curious, and maybe this comes out in your in the scenarios themselves, but maybe start by grounding us on helping us to understand how to think about sort of climate migration. How are you envisioning that taking shape? And I think we have the phrase, but viscerally, sort of, I don't know how to feel that.
Yeah, I think that climate migration is a really, long-term transformative experience. I'm finding myself getting caught up because getting caught on my words as I'm reflecting on my own history and my own experiences, having grown up here in Puerto Rico and in Florida along the Gulf Coast, and being displaced by natural disasters, and seeing how that transformed my own personal identity, my sense of belonging, my long-term, and my family and my community's long-term economic and housing stability, and economic opportunity, and just even, the social emotional impacts that climate migration and being displaced due to natural disasters can have. I also wanted to just kind of take a step back and talk about climate and climate change being inclusive of not only a natural disaster, but also accounting for the legacy harms of generations of extractive policies, colonization, and attempted genocide that have driven environmental degradation across, the past generations. And so when I think about a just transition and when I talk about climate change, I'm really thinking about how we center people who are most affected by climate change and ensure that they're centered as key decision makers in crafting community-based policy solutions in the transition to a clean economy towards net zero carbon emissions. And so really in thinking about climate migration, the ways that that can show up according to emerging trends is that it's really inclusive of both internal domestic displacement due to natural disasters and cross-border displacement internationally. So what we're seeing is a lot of displacement due to water scarcity or extreme heat. Dust bowl-like conditions are emerging across the Midwest, and there's emerging, a high likelihood for more pandemics that are exacerbated through cross-species spillovers and migration patterns that are shifting across ecosystems. And of course, flash flooding and, what were once in 100-year events, water disaster events, according to the IPCC, are going to happen much more often at an annual basis, by the year 2050 and in the upcoming decades. And so displacement and climate migration is really just mass movements of communities in response to not only natural disaster events, but also the ways in which climate change exacerbates already existing inequities in communities and can contribute to geopolitical upheaval and refugee crises that we're witnessing now, as well as wars due to food scarcity and just the scarcity of resources and the tensions that creates in landscapes of power that we haven't done the work across sectors in unpacking, how are we going to be accountable for legacy harms over the, past centuries that have contributed to the world's environmental state today. And how do we develop the right infrastructure and policies and ways of knowing that honor multiple worldviews that will allow us to really create a shared vision for how to heal from climate transitions and migrations.
Yeah, there's so much there. I mean, on the one hand, sort of we have all this unresolved history and stuff to deal with at the same time as entering into this period of great sort of chaos and trauma forthcoming, right? And holding all of those things together, it does feel potentially overwhelming. You took a scenarios approach to your work here, right? I wonder if you could say a little more about why you chose to use scenarios, how you went about developing those, and maybe any of the insights from your scenarios that you derived.
Absolutely. I think that with the scenarios, I was really interested in exploring speculative, my passion for Afrofuturism, my own roots in Black and Indigenous ancestral traditions and natural ways of knowing, and thinking through how we can shift, this conversation on climate change and climate migrations that often centers dominant models of Western scientific and mathematical projections to, kind of frame what the future may look like. And instead, through scenario building in, a participatory, like ethnographic approach with frontline communities, with policy officials, with business leaders, I really wanted to tap into the collective imagination, particularly centering frontline communities and folks who are directly impacted by the changes and the shifts that we're experiencing on a mass scale. And so with scenario building, it was really just this opportunity to tell stories across multilateral perspectives and viewpoints, and to really tailor them towards stakeholders that may have completely different ideas of what success looks like according to an economic perspective versus a policy official who's preparing for an upcoming election cycle, to communities who have been historically excluded from decision-making processes. And so the scenario building work that I did was really rooted in thinking through 4 archetypes of change across collapse, transformation, discipline scenarios, and growth scenarios, and thinking about how different stakeholders and emerging trends across social, technological, environmental, economic, political, and values and cultural based shifts are going to shape how all of these different factors are going to show up in our lives and in the infrastructure that we co-create.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I realized there was, the second part of your question around like, what are some of the emerging trends that came up from these scenarios and from these case studies? And one of the key learnings in this field was focused on the long-term social emotional impact of climate displacement due to the trauma that's associated with natural disasters and massive shifts in the built environment. And so for frontline communities, displacement due to natural disasters can trigger post-traumatic stress disorder from the legacies of colonization through land dispossession and enslavement and the exploitation of migrants just across all of these different communities and factors. And so thinking about how to build, portable relational infrastructure to transmute collective trauma was something that became really a central focus throughout the scenarios, and our ability to achieve that or not within these different constraints was really a key driving force in what type of future we may find ourselves within. Another element was this focus on being able to create the right vessels of attunement and alignment for collective abundance. And so how do we create the right boundaries and infrastructure for the historic amount of investments that are being made in climate resilience infrastructure in the United States? How do we prevent bottlenecks in our systems to ensure that communities who have historically been underinvested in are able to access, this abundance of resources and not experience any bottlenecks in accessing them, particularly in thinking about, technical capacity building and providing comprehensive support to ensure that communities are able to access this abundance, and that it's not just being, reallocated and reinvested in ways that disenfranchise or completely exclude historically marginalized communities. And so holding and honoring different worldviews to visualize more inclusive shared realities was another key trend that came up both within, the IPCC report and in my conversations with policy stakeholders and with frontline communities and business leaders of thinking through, how from all of these different sectors, how do we create shared language for shared accountability, and what does it mean to invest in community power building that honors and centers ancestral traditional practices and wisdom and natural ways of knowing and ways of relating and forecasting traditions that have historically been erased as communities have been displaced and uprooted from our cultural traditions and roots. And so rerouting ourselves and rewilding ourselves and, really embracing different worldviews and coming together and creating public forums to create shared reality, especially in times of crisis when misinformation and disinformation run rampant. It's really important to hold space for that collective dialogue and community building.
I feel like we could just end it right there. That's like a mic drop moment. Those three, God, there's such powerful. All three of those insights are so powerful. I love the idea of collective abundance. It reminds me of a conversation I was having the other day around sort of what a difference having a mindset of scarcity versus a mindset of abundance can make, and just where you can go from that even, right? And then, just ensuring that we're not monopolizing abundance amongst few, but sharing it and really figuring out how to thrive together is beautiful.
Can I just respond to what you just said around monopolizing collective abundance? I really want to unpack this, because another trend that emerged just in conversations with directly impacted communities was the ways in which the language around collective care, around safety, and even the word resilience in and of itself has been co-opted. This sentiment of it being co-opted, or of it being you diffused through different initiatives that government or business, private sector stakeholders are using, where they're rolling out initiatives, whether it's around redevelopment or infrastructure investments, or resource allocation broadly, in the name of collective care and safety. However, what communities are finding is that while they're using many of these words that are connected to healing and connected to abundance, it's actually being weaponized in a way in which historically marginalized communities aren't receiving a lot of the collective abundance. And I think that we saw that even through the pandemic, and in resource allocation particularly. I think that an example that comes up a lot is with the Small Business Administration, and just all of the how a majority of funds, particularly from the Paycheck Protection Program, to support small businesses, didn't reach a lot of small businesses, and didn't reach majority of the Black-owned, Black Indigenous-owned businesses across the nation. And so making sure that collective abundance isn't monopolized, and that acknowledging the ways in which the language of collective care, collective safety, and abundance can be weaponized or misused in ways that undermines authentic initiatives for community power building is something that's really important to be mindful of as we're experiencing so many shifts and transitions. Who's being left out and intentionally excluded from abundance is a key question and guiding question that is an offering in this toolkit.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I'm struck, Elijah, that a lot of what you're saying is quite challenging, I think, for a lot of folks. And I'm interested in, you developed all of this through participatory processes, but collective imagination and speculation and stuff like that are not words that I naturally will connect with a lot of different sort of like populations being able to come together and do it. So I wonder, how did you foster that environment for folks to sort of together imagine possible futures? How did you bring some of that learning into the scenario development process? How did that actually work?
Absolutely. I think that I experienced a lot of shifts, like tonal shifts, and almost just like completely was exposed to so many different frameworks of how to build community power, how to engage with communities in authentic ways that over long time horizons. I'm creating something that's talking about what's going to unfold over the upcoming decades. What does it look like to go into a process of engaging with stakeholders across sectors and thinking, this isn't just a one-time conversation to inform a report that I'm putting out, but this is something that I want to be accountable to, over the upcoming decades. And what do I need to do? What's the work that I need to do as a foresight practitioner to build those relationships over a long time horizon, and to build power for regenerative futures over a long time horizon by, pivoting and updating and, reflecting on these strategies and these forecasts and how they change with new emerging trends. And so that's something that I've been thinking about personally, and also just, going in with a reflexive practice of acknowledging my own identity and positionality, and the power dynamics that I hold. If I'm doing research that's funded by a specific institution, or I'm, doing something for a specific client, how am I ensuring that, I'm being mindful of the legacies that I'm inheriting with how other organizations have or haven't successfully, engaged communities who have been historically excluded from civic engagement processes. And so that's a big part of how I approached, thinking about participatory engagement and creating a safe space. Was like, what are the assumptions and biases that I bring? How does my identity and lived expertise with this topic shape and color, my approach and how I'm communicating and presenting and being in community and showing up in different spaces, were just all some of the core foundational work that I did before even picking up the phone or talking to people. was just being mindful about how I was going to show up in that space and be accountable to, the legacies that I'm implicated within myself. So that was part of the work. And then also, again, wanting to do, create a space where folks felt like they could invite their own lived experiences and have honest, candid conversations about not only best practices, but also the challenges that they see in community power building work, in movement building work, in policy design and implementation and evaluation, and in resource allocation and being transparent as a business leader, during incredibly transformative and times of crisis. And so, in order to do that, I think being practicing that, myself and inviting folks to be rooted in their lived experiences and their own ancestral traditions, and inviting, different alternative ways of knowing. I think setting that intention and offering that in initial conversations was something that was really grounding. I think like having grounding practices and rituals in participatory work is really important to remind folks of, all that they're bringing into a space, and just honoring that.
Yeah. I think one of the words that kind of struck me just now when you said rituals, I feel like that's such an underutilized way of grounding and connecting, that I think we often sort of skip through, right, in the name of efficiency or whatnot, right? I wonder, it's such a tricky thing to do to sort of foster that space to bring folks together in this way. Did you have any hiccups that we can learn from? Any challenges that you overcame that we can learn from?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that what I shared earlier around thinking about community engagement over long time horizons, like what does it mean to be accountable? What does it mean to think about, evaluating these forecasts or this toolkit over the upcoming decades in the context of emerging trends and everything? That completely shifted. That was another mindset shift and mind frame shift as I'm time traveling across both historical records and projections of future models. It's just been something that's just made me think of the systems that I needed to remind myself and to have participatory practice and community building be a ritual throughout my days and my months, and just thinking about that, like what does it mean to build infrastructure at that personal, like individual level in my practice, to constantly try to connect with folks who have poured so much into this work and have really just contributed to so many transformative movements and shifts and policies that have created more comprehensive support structures for folks, and also have so much wisdom to share. And just thinking about how to translate that and honor that, I think that learning about what systems would be helpful in having those reminders and keeping track of just community building work, I think is something that's really stood out to me probably halfway through the project of how do I authentically engage with folks over a long time horizon, and completely disrupt and dismantle these extractive legacies of community building that are focused on the output rather than long-term shifts and movements that really take an investment of time and energy and community.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, again, just a beautiful insight. I mean, it's shifting from a transactional relationship to a relational one, right? And over a longer period of time. And, I think it's easy to fall into that trap of like more transactional and in some sense, just more extractive, right? That's another word that you just used, but it's like sort of like, what can I extract from the community to take into whatever process I'm doing, whatever output I'm creating, versus are we really investing in it for the long haul? So I know that you're doing a series of speculative workshops and stuff now as well, right? You're launching into this new process. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're undertaking with Artifacts?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, with my work as a next generation foresight practitioner fellow this year with the School of International Futures, I'll be facilitating speculative design workshops with frontline communities, rooted in the scenarios that are being released through this Seeding Power for Regenerative Futures toolkit. And so, with that, we're really just going to dive in and explore how the different trends and power dynamics that are emergent within these scenarios and factors to consider how can we create embodied experiences, whether it's through speculative fiction, short stories, persona development of what would a day in the life look like for somebody from a frontline community or for a policy official, to be thinking through, developing some of the speculative policy and infrastructure and just new words and emergent language that was created in thinking through scenario building and scenario design. And so that process with the speculative design workshops will also be really experimental and tapping into, one of the key findings from how climate migrations will impact, communities on a mass scale was this disruption of sleeping patterns and almost like complex post-traumatic stress disorder from chronic exposure to displacement and migration. And so in reflecting on that and thinking about dreaming as an ancestral, tradition, dreaming as a practice and a portal and a simulation space to imagine alternative origin stories and futures. What I'll be doing with the speculative design workshops is really piloting dream mimicry and how we can draw on dreams and lucid dreaming in particular as a way to stimulate, the collective imagination and think through different ways of just making connections across different elements and different factors and different trends that we may not usually see as something that's, I don't know, something that we wouldn't necessarily intuitively draw connections on, but by tapping into this altered state of dreaming and imagining together, we can find different connections that can lead to new innovative solutions that are rooted in, our own cultural traditions and practices.
I love it. I love it. Before I ask you this last question, because I know actually, like all of us are thinking, oh, how can we get involved? My goodness. Any Q&A that you have, feel free to dump that into the Q&A box, into the chat. We'll be turning to audience Q&A in just a second. But how can people get involved with your work or stay connected with your work?
Absolutely. I'll be I have a newsletter that people can sign up on, and I'll be, sharing out more information about the speculative design workshops that I'll be hosting from May through August, and also invitations to collaborate and co-write and, engage in speculative design work, even as an artist resident, a Changing Climate artist resident at the Santa Fe Art Institute from, September through November. That'll definitely be a really creative and dynamic experimental space to think about, translating into developing a multisensorial experiential futures exhibit and platform. So it's all with the intentionality of it being very participatory and inclusive. And so through the newsletter, that's like the main way to really understand and learn more about upcoming events and engagements.
Very exciting. Very exciting. All right. I want to turn to some audience Q&A. Clyde here says, do you have any examples on how creating a shared vision of the future can cross our political divide? And I think that political divide thing is sort of central, right? How do we do this?
Absolutely.
Answer that.
yes. Hold on, let me commune with the ancestors. We have some birds visiting us right now. They have a lot of feedback. Let's see what this transmission has for us. I think that, looking at emerging trends within, eco-fascism, nationalism, white nationalism, and also abolitionist movements and anti-capitalist movements and healing justice frameworks and transformative justice frameworks, being embedded into social movements. I think that's something that, I've seen in thinking through histories and legacies of social movements, and the ways in which, the role that social movements have played in transforming social, political, economic, and cultural landscapes of power. Something that's really come up, that's focused on, community power building and coalition building, is around how important it is to really invest in strategies for collective care and safety, and to hold space for radical transparency and accountability in our movement building spaces, and creating, public forums for that level of accountability and for that level of, restorative and transformative justice work to happen, to have those conversations. If we want to talk about intergenerational healing is going to take a lot of work. It's not going to be comfortable all of the time. And it's really important to have the rituals and have the practices and have the infrastructure that's needed to support care, and making sure that folks have the resources that they need to process intergenerational trauma. I think a big part of, movement building work that has bridged political divides is thinking through, holding space for those conversations around radical transparency and accountability, when folks have very competing and altering worldviews and understandings of different politics and cultural identity.
Yeah. In some ways, I guess it's sort of boiling some of it back down to things that we are universally can universally sort of understand and experience, right? Some of that trauma and emotion that folks hold, even if it's not the same, how do you tap back into the humanity of that?
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. Next question. Oh, this one's a long one. So I'll do this one first. How do we collectively build a regenerative future together while reconciling with the past, especially if the past is a divisive one? I think you've talked a little bit to this already, but maybe we could say a little bit more about what it means to sort of create that collective in some ways, right? Like bringing those different, what are some strategies to actually bring those folks together to have a single conversation as opposed to multiple ones, knowing that it takes time and investment in building those relations?
Something that's been really helpful for me that I'd like to offer in thinking through, co-creating futures together and working, in community towards a desirable future, or many possibilities across futures, is thinking about it across the scales of, the individual level, the interpersonal level, community levels, and then like broader systemic, collective global work. So with that, I think that there's different strategies that have to be practiced across all of these scales. I mean, part of another emerging trend from the research was just this need for more collective global decision-making mechanisms that had the fluidity and like dynamism that's needed to respond, in a time of crisis. And so thinking through what it means to design shared visioning spaces, and how to have more open data infrastructure and frameworks while also practicing data sovereignty and, dynamic affirmative consent and respecting folks, privacy and agency in, how they share, especially with the rise of carceral surveillance technologies. Speaking on divisive futures, I feel like the rise of artificial intelligence and different surveillance technologies will play a major role in contributing to disinformation and misinformation campaigns that really will reflect a lot of the divisive polarization that I think we've been experiencing now and have seen emerge in various cycles across time, but has definitely been almost like a constant element of having these different worldviews. And so I think that it's really important to reflect at those different levels, at those different scales, on what it means, with that framework again in mind of reflecting on your own positionality, your own identity, and your own cultural traditions and roots and legacies that we're implicated in, and new legacies that we want to seed power for. How are we really creating the infrastructure and holding space to have those radically transparent conversations, and hold each other accountable?
Yeah. I'm going to go off script a little bit because what you're saying makes me think of something. I think a lot of us have our own visions of what we want the world to be, our own aspirations for what our preferred futures are, right? But it strikes me that if you're really going to hold space for lots of different opinions, for lots of sort of collective, to build that collective, to imagine things, that you almost have to, in some ways, I don't know, do you have to set aside your own aspirations, or how do you navigate that, right? How do you navigate it so that you really are welcoming as much into the room as possible?
There's a couple of different strategies here, depending on the context. I mean, I think that there's a lot of, again, that individual work that needs to be done on reflecting on one's own, privilege and power and positionality in relation to as a facilitator of different engagement processes. I think that that's critical. I think that that's crucial. And I think that, being transparent as much as possible on any conflicts of interest, or, how your lived experiences may shape, the way that you show up in the space. I think practicing that level of personal awareness is really critical, and amplifying social emotional development and healing, and introducing that at scale within school systems, and within our infrastructure and community power building work across sectors is critical. And so, yeah, I think that that's just crucial and can't really be overstated.
Yeah. I wanted to turn to Ariana's question here. What could using your toolkit on a sort of a daily, a yearly, sort of a regular basis, what could that look like for working with communities, with people working on Native and BIPOC issues, with youth, elders, families? And I think Ariana's especially interested in the idea of traditional foods, climate justice work, of indigenous science and foodways. But both that and in general, what could working with your toolkit on a regular basis look like?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this question, Ariana. I think that looking for this toolkit, I designed it with the intentionality of, it basically being something that anybody can pick up and use these 4 scenarios and the guiding questions and the strategies in a way that, can be used to facilitate distributed and decentralized speculative design sessions and workshops, and can be tailored and include different prompts or writing guided questions and writing prompts that could invite participants, on a specific topic, to reimagine or to rewrite their own scenarios or their own strategies, given the context that's provided through thinking through how climate migration will shape the futures of civic engagement and belonging in the United States. And so I think that being able to, just create generative art and creative practices and processes to practice creative resistance and really just thinking about pushing the boundaries of the imagination, and the limitations that we've inherited through the models that we're introduced to and indoctrinated in on a daily basis. I think that really the hope here is to have these scenarios be almost like inspiration for folks to really think through and imagine what it would be like to be embodied 30 years from now, and think about that on a personal level and develop their own day in the life of what it might look like to walk through that. And that's really the work that I'm inviting folks to with the speculative design workshops is how can we use these scenarios and this toolkit to create generative art, to inspire movements and to inspire new practices and new models of living and just holding space for each other.
I love that. I mean, it's such a simple but powerful notion that imagining is like a form of resistance to sort of what we're in, right? Like to the sort of indoctrinated ideas and ways of being that we sort of are in right now. Peter wanted to know, he is mentioning the idea of abundance, and how he struggles with the idea of abundance because it feels like a relative concept. And so he wanted to know, how do you build a collective, a community definition of abundance so that we can all sort of understand or think about it in the same ways?
I love it. Yeah, I mean, that's the work. I think that's the work that we need to step into is developing shared language and unpacking our own lived experiences with inheriting potentially, a scarcity mindset, or having speaking for myself, having experienced housing and economic, instability due to natural disasters and just, so many other factors. It's been this process of rerouting myself and walking through again at that individual level. What does abundance mean? What does it mean? What infrastructure and what work do I need to do to reimagine my relationship with resources and what it means to invest in a desirable future, not only for myself, but also for, my family, my chosen family, my communities, and for future generations. And so I think that collective abundance, unpacking that at the individual level, bringing those shared insights into a collective space, a community forum, and really creating a dynamic space and experimental space to piece together, different visions of what that could look like and what that means in different conditions. It's something that I think could be really powerful and something definitely that the different scenarios within this toolkit can provide different frameworks or different suggestions to start triggering, imaginings about what collective abundance can look like, given that it is such a, personal, something that can be so personal, and yet, when we examine the inequities, the structural inequities, and the impacts that it has, it's something where, it just becomes blatantly clear how important it is to really think about what it means to create a comprehensive support structure for everybody to experience abundance in the ways that are both very personal and in ways that, reset what we think of to be our minimum standard and our quality of life.
Yeah, it's great. And it starts with just imagining what could be and grounding ourselves in how we think about it and sharing it, right? Like there's a vulnerability to putting that out there too, I think, as well. Syed wants to know, how did you find the community reactions from people who you worked with on the toolkit and the scenarios when you sort of like finished developing them? Like, how did they react and how did sort of what input or responses did you get?
The reactions have been generative. um, I was like, so much feedback, so much, like energized. Like I've experienced, folks feeling a sense of buoyancy, or like a sense of, I don't know, just like very, very interested, or a specific theme or a specific topic, or the interplay between different dynamics, that unfold within the 4 different scenarios have sparked conversations about policy right now, about policy that's trying to be crafted, or business strategies, or movement building strategies that are unfolding right now. And so it's kind of been like this generative and iterative process of thinking through, like it almost went immediately from, okay, this is just a scenario that I'm reading, to, okay, how can I apply this in my work right now, and having those conversations with different community members that has led to, more work through the ONIRIC lab, in partnership with, different folks who I've connected with throughout this process, to think about how can we translate this research and this insight into ongoing strategies right now that are already working towards regenerative futures in different ways.
Sounds like a very successful usage of the scenarios. I think we have time for maybe one, maximum 2 more questions. There are 2 that I do want to get to. One is, do you have any advice for connecting folks who are homebound or have low tech access to participatory processes? Both, I think, from the fostering and organizing side, as well as folks who may be homebound and have low tech access or have low tech access.
Absolutely. I think that thinking comprehensively around like accessibility and accessibility needs, and trying to have those open conversations around what communities may need in order for it to truly be an inclusive process, is the best way to start thinking and planning for the design of a participatory engagement process for folks who may be living in rural areas, or areas that don't have access to the internet, or any other barriers that they may be experiencing. I think that connecting with folks as much as you can, and as possible, like in person, or meeting people where they're at in all of the ways that that's possible, is just a key, I think, strategy and guide that I'd offer for that. Is engaging with folks about what their accessibility needs are, hearing directly from them, and using that to inform the design process, and budgeting and planning for what it would mean to really create an inclusive design process, and trying as much as possible not to compromise on what the needs are in order for that to truly be the experience that people have. Because I think that there's a high cost to saying that you're going to create a participatory engagement process and then not have the resources or the capacity to truly practice that. So I think that practicing harm reduction in that work is really important.
Practicing harm rejection. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Okay, just maybe this is the biggest question, and I'm going to give you, unfortunately, just about a minute for it, Elijah. But can you share more about dreaming, and what dreaming does, and why it's a core focus of your work? And we'll finish with that.
So I was shortly after I experienced hurricanes in Puerto Rico, where I am right now, I struggled with sleep deprivation, because I was having really intense nightmares because of just how traumatic the experience was. And so I had to train myself on how to lucid dream, because I knew that I was having this reoccurring nightmare each night, and the only way that I could really break this pattern and enjoy sleep and deep rest was if I learned how to practice lucidity in times of uncertainty and crisis and moments where I feel like I lack agency. And so dreaming became a ritual and a practice for me that I was able to tap into and develop a strong, like deep rooted inner, sense of belonging, regardless of what was happening in my built environment and how, natural disasters completely transformed my communities. And so this ritual and this practice is just something that I always return to, that I know connects me with my ancestral traditions, that I know connects me with natural ways of knowing, and that I know is an incredibly powerful simulation space to explore alternative histories and origin stories, and think about what it would mean to design emergent futures and landscapes through dreaming. And so it's a ritual and a practice that I'm hoping to offer through dream mimicry in my speculative design workshops that will simulate what a lucid dreaming experience could be like for seeding power for regenerative futures.
Oh my God, so cool. Sign us all up. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think I speak for all of us in saying that it's been a wonderful hour with you, Elijah. Really appreciate all of your thoughts and insights and all of your sharing. So really, thank you so much. We are at the hour. Come back for more. We have more coming up in April. We have Rafael Bideau-Waddington from the LEED Future Lab talking about from Chanel to the greater Paris metropolis, researching future through art. And then in May, we have Mary Doyle, founder of Rural on Purpose, talking about building scenarios for rural futures. Please join us for those. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time today. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We will see you next time. Thank you.